The White Sox just lost 100 games for the third straight season. And what's even worse, we have to trust some of the people responsible for this to turn things around.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan and contributor for SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the FanSided Network, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, the White Sox lost last night. Nothing new, but it did mark for the first time in franchise history the team has had 3 straight 100-loss seasons. And I want to discuss how you and I have to trust some of the people responsible for this mess to clean it up. Then let's discuss how Mike Tauchman's injury news could impact his future with the club. And finally, let's circle back to the 3 straight 100-loss seasons and go over how things turned out for franchises who suffered a similar fate. Okay, shout out to Sleeper White Sox for being the inspiration behind this segment when it tweeted this out. And for those watching on YouTube, I have the tweet up. This is at Sleeper White Sox. For a third consecutive season, the White Sox have lost 100 games. Things are looking up, but it's a reminder that there are still fundamental changes that need to take place. I'm struggling to believe the people who led us here can take us back to the very top, #White Sox. And I like how Josh Nelson of SoxMachine.com pointed this out on X, formerly Twitter, and I have the tweet up for those watching on YouTube. This is at SoxMachine_Josh. In their 125 years of existence, the Chicago White Sox have lost 100-plus games 7 times. 4 of those instances have happened since 2018. And think about that. The White Sox are celebrating 125 years of existence by going through one of the team's worst stretches ever. And keep in mind, things were so bad towards the late 1960s. Read it in Chili Dog MVP, the book that's been in the background, talks about it. Things were so bad in the 1960s that the team was possibly moving to Milwaukee. And yet this franchise never lost this many games over a 3-year stretch. And we have to trust 2 people responsible for this current mess to clean it up. Jerry Reinsdorf and Chris Getz. Now, obviously, there are other culprits. Tony La Russa being one of them. He's still in the organization as an advisor, by the way. Kenny Williams and Rick Hahn, too. But the 2 people basically in charge in terms of the budget and in terms of baseball decisions, Jerry Reinsdorf and Chris Getz. And I talked about it on Tuesday's show about how the team is trying to rebuild the trust and how they can do it. But I think I did minimize that, man. Reinsdorf and Getz are currently 2 key culprits in this stretch of futility. We got to deal with them for at least 3 more years. We got to partially rely on them to turn things around. Now, I say partially because Jerry can only impact the team so much. And Chris Getz does have other people around him to help out. But remember, hopefully now that Jerry's been pushed to the back of the room by Brooks, Boyer, and Getz, because Boyer is in charge of the business, and we haven't seen, the shadow GM, Tony La Russa, much. So it seems like Chris Getz is in charge of baseball operations. Hopefully they've pushed Jerry to the back of the room, but he's still going to be in charge of setting the budget. It is his money. And that's where you get that pit in your stomach, as Jerry rarely authorizes a lot of spending. And think about it. The payroll is over $200 million in 2022. I think that was the only time it ever got over $200 million. Maybe in 2023. I didn't see it in my notes on that. I think it was like just a little bit under. I think it was 159. But it was $200 million in 2022, and it yielded an 81-81 team. Because it's hard to repeat as AL Central champs with Josh Harrison supposedly being an upgrade at second base, because too many self-imposed salary caps, too much, not enough spending. That has kept this team from truly ever contending. And the White Sox are still one of only 2 teams who have never given out a $100 million contract. The going rate for premium talent. And why that matters is just the unwillingness to pay the market rate to get players that put you over the top. Andrew Benintendi at $78 million is not going to put you over the top. Basically, bargain bin shopping for players that put you over the top happened in the last rebuild. Dallas Keuchel, Liam Hendricks, Yasmani Grandal, and then even trading for Lance Lynn wasn't enough. And think about it. The White Sox didn't have that second wave of premium prospects that other teams would want. That Lance Lynn was probably the best the White Sox could have done in the trade market. So I get your worry that, okay, if this young core continues to mature and avoid the stagnation, it is still hard to see the owner committing the necessary financial resources to put the team over the top. And then you got the GM who was in charge of player development. That led to a farm system rotting out. One of the reasons, again, why the team is in this current situation. Now, to be fair to Chris Getz, he was not given much to work with until Mike Shirley started doing the drafts in 2020. And, there's only so much Getz could do up until that point. Basically, you can only polish a turd so much to make it look like a rock, because you're never going to make it look like a diamond. But at the end of the day, it's still a turd. But at the same time, Getz put together an historically awful 2024 team, in part because he wanted to focus on run prevention. And he acquired a talent that could not prevent any runs. Although part of that also goes back to the owner, who wanted things turned around quickly. And I get the feeling the only way that Getz thought, the only way we can turn things around quickly is pitching and defense. Score 3 or 4 runs, keep the other team to 1 or 2, but slim margin for error. And when you're that talent efficient, you can't have a slim margin for error. And I think they probably still lose 100 games last year. But had he focused on just getting back to Moneyball basics like he did this past offseason, maybe the club isn't historically awful. And that's another thing. Getz still has to clear the bar of putting together a competitive roster. He hasn't done that yet. That is something he's going to have to potentially do at some point, you would like to think. And he's only done the easy stuff right now. I do give him credit by probably leveraging losing 121 games to get the owner to finally agree to modernize the front office. But this current core, he was mostly spotted by Rick Hahn on his way out the door. Colson Montgomery, Edgar Caro, Davis Martin, Grant Taylor, Jordan Leisure, they were already here before he got promoted to GM. Now, to be fair, Getz did bring in Kyle Teal, Chase Mydroth, Miguel Vargas, Shane Smith, Mike Vassell, along with Brady Montgomery, who's now the team's top prospect. But again, keyword had to bring in, because he had to leverage trading Garrett Crochet, because the owner was likely not going to sign him to that massive extension that the Red Sox just gave Crochet this year, and bringing in guys from other teams' organizations. So the player development staff, it's been upgraded, and the technology's been upgraded, but they still have to prove they can develop the players Mike Shirley has drafted and what David Keller will eventually sign in international free agency. Now, I bring those two up because it isn't just going to be solely on Reinsdorf and Getz to clean this mess up. I mean, Shirley and Keller have to identify the talent and their scouting staff, because remember, you always want young talent for their peak performance years, not just because it's cheap. And you also want to build up a farm system of players that other teams want to trade for when you want to try to get players that put you over the top. Because remember, you can also use the trade market. You don't always have to spend a ton of money. You can also trade for players in their prime. It happens. But then Paul Janisch, Director of Player Development, Brian Bannister, Director of Pitching, Ryan Fuller, Director of Hitting, along with the minor league coaching staff and development staff, they have to develop these players. And let's not forget, Will Venable has to lead these guys to victory on the field. And, Getz does have some capable lieutenants in Josh Barfield and Gene Watson. So I do feel comfortable there's some adults in the room, but this organization supposedly had a smart GM in Rick Hahn from 2017 to 2019. And Marco Patti was running international free agency, and he was, the scout of the year. And look at how that turned out. So that's why you always got to go back to the one constant, which is Jerry. And another constant that's been a part of this is Chris Getz. We got to trust these guys that made the mess. But hey, you break it, you should clean it up. And I'm willing to give Getz a shot. Jerry, maybe he sells to Justin Ishbia a lot sooner. Well, I talked on yesterday's show how I'm fine with Mike Tauchman if he doesn't play during the final week of the season. Well, he's definitely not playing the final week of the season after going on the 10-day IL with a torn meniscus. Let's discuss how this injury could impact his future with the club, and that's after the break. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for a kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. And I'm always telling you, FanDuel's traditional money line spreads and over-unders are fun to play. But if you want to win big or at least double or triple your money, play FanDuel's props, parlays, and futures. So, for example, in tonight's Seattle at Arizona's game, FanDuel has a same game parlay featuring Kenneth Walker III, Trey Benson, JSN, and Marvin Harrison Jr., all scoring an anytime touchdown. Last time I checked, it was at plus 3101. So if it hits and you put, say, $10 on it, you can win $310.13. You think Chicago can beat Vegas on Sunday and both teams hit the over at 47.5 points? And that's the last time I checked. It was at 47.5 points. And it was at plus 270 the last time I checked. And if you put, say, $10 on that and it hits, you just won $27. So pretty much you nearly tripled your money. FanDuel is quick, easy, and the best way to add a little bit more energy to your Sunday. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, you can get the audio version of the show on places such as Apple or Spotify. So make sure to follow or subscribe on wherever you get your podcasts. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me and maybe some hope. All right, so I loved what Mike Tauchman did this season for the White Sox. Just the epitome of a professional hitter. Sounds like he also was a huge clubhouse leader. And, think about this new sign of respect. He played a game on a torn meniscus where he still made some diving catches. They had the highlight. I think it was Friday. He was jumping into the net to get an out. I just fully appreciate what he did this season. But his season is officially over after going on the 10-day IL, as he will need knee surgery next Tuesday, per Scott Merkin, the White Sox beat reporter for MLB.com, to repair that tear in his knee. But I do think this could open up the possibility that the White Sox, there's a possibility that they non-tender him. Because while the numbers are solid, he only played in 93 games this season because of hamstring injuries. And you could tell the legs were starting to go. Running looked painful for him. I do think, though, he's going to be back because if he is available, if the surgery goes well, if it's kind of like what happened to Austin Slater at the earlier part of the season, and that's what it sounds like, he's, a guy that could come back then. He's still your best bridge option in right field until Brandon Montgomery's ready. And while I think you could upgrade over Tauchman, because Tauchman is just, he's a raised floor guy. He's a professional hitter. I don't want to even entertain the possibility of signing a long-term option in right field to block Montgomery's path, because that seems to be where he should be playing, is in right field. And he could be at the big leagues as soon as by the trade deadline next year. He's shot up through the system already. He's at Double-A before a broken foot ended his season prematurely. So if you're looking for a bridge veteran, you already have one in your back pocket. And he, just exchange arb, try to come to the middle and sign him. Although, here's another reason why it might impact his future. If his ARB figure is beyond $5 million, then I think you actually got to think long and hard. Because while the team is going to have money to spend in the offseason, just by logical assumption to, if you want to match this year's payroll, you're going to have to spend some money. I get the feeling that the money's still going to be limited. And we just saw how spending $6 million to bring back Andrew Vaughn ate away at the budget and left limited resources for, say, the bullpen. And to those that have answered, to those that have asked in the YouTube community page, do I think the White Sox will spend money in the offseason? Yes. Because if they don't, it's going to be criminal to cut payroll yet again from another 100-loss team. And you saw by even spending $89 million on the payroll this year, that's what it was at opening day. It's now down to 78. You got at least a better season from historically awful. And you got a season of hope. So you'd think, hey, we could at least match this year's budget. They would then have to spend $51.9 million in the offseason just to get to the $89 million, because you only got $37.1 million on the books for sure. That's Andrew Benintendi, $17.1 million salary, and then Robert Jr.'s $20 million option, which is pretty much going to be exercised per Getz. And even if they exercise Martin Perez's $10 million option, okay, still $41.9 million you're going to have to spend. And they don't have a ton of ARB-eligible players. So you're talking about what? With your pre-ARB and ARB, 10, 15 million? So you still got, and I'm being generous, probably in the 10 to 15 million. So there's still some money to spend. But again, it's going to be limited. unless Jerry just authorizes the payroll to be tripled. But if it goes to 100 million, they can spend some, but it's still going to be, as you've seen, limited dollars. And I think they really, really want to emphasize improvement over the offseason with this young core instead of just going and getting like Kyle Schwarber and Pete Alonso to play first base and, Schwarber to DH. I mean, the one thing that I could see them spend some money on is to attach money to Andrew Benintendi in a trade to get rid of him. But again, I just don't know how many contenders are out there that are like, yeah, I'll take on a replacement level DH because that's what he is at this point in his career. And I talked about it yesterday. Long term, they still need more dudes in the bullpen. So that's probably where I'd prefer to see some of the money go. But again, if you get that money tied up like you did with Andrew Vaughn, that is money that could take away from getting more dudes in the bullpen. And the other reason why I don't see them spending a ton right now is the true lineup superstars for the next good team are still either at A ball or haven't even played rookie ball yet. Caleb Bonemer, Billy Carlson, Jaden Foskey, and some of them still aren't even in college. I mean, some of them are still in college, Rock Chwalski and Justin LeBron. So that's why I think they're going to rely more on the draft, international free agency. And again, if you want to be baffled, you want to be like, oh, feel free to leave it in the comments. I fully understand where you're coming from. I've always believed, and I talked about it a couple days ago, let's demand it all. But anyways, getting back to Tauchman, I'm fine with bringing him back, despite him being 35 next season and only hitting 9 home runs, because that's another thing that could play against that, where the White Sox might say, you know what, we can go a little bit cheaper. Maybe they do want to invest a lot in bridge guys in the bullpen. I don't know. But at least Tauchman's going to provide that raised floor bridge player until Brady Montgomery's ready. Hit 263 with a 356 400 slash line, 1.4 F4, 115 WRC plus. I'd love for that to be back in the lineup next season. I'd love for that to be back in the lineup more than 93 games. Plus, the intangibles he brings is immense. And if Brady Montgomery is ready by, say, the trade deadline next year, let's accelerate his timeline because he has exceeded expectations. You could either deal Tauchman if he's still producing 263, 356, 400 slash line. And I think in that case, I know they did Tauchman a solid by not trading him at the deadline because he did want to stay in Chicago to be near his family, and they had the year of arbs, so they didn't need to trade him. But next year, you would have to trade him because he's going to be a free agent after the next season. And even if you don't deal him, say you still want to do him a solid because you realize, hey, if he walks after next season, it's not the end of the world because you've got Brady Montgomery. Great tutor to have in the clubhouse to help Brady Montgomery learn his way at the big leagues. And otherwise, it's still just a great guy to have in the clubhouse to hold some of these younger guys accountable. Again, show them, reinforcing how to go about their business, just being a good leader. Well, I didn't do a Way Back Wednesday segment yesterday due to some other stuff that came up. So let's do a Throwback Thursday and discuss the company the White Sox just joined and having 3 straight 100-loss seasons and what those teams went on to accomplish after the break. What do you get when you have a bald eagle standing on top of a silverback gorilla riding a T-Rex? Confidence, pure confidence. And if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Go Long. That's exactly where Rugiet Go Long comes in. This isn't just another ED pill. It's a total game changer for confidence. Go Long combines 2 doctor-trusted medications in 1 dual-action formula so you can get hard and go the distance. The effects can last up to 36 hours. That's confidence all day, all night, and even into the next day. The process is simple. Connect with a board-certified doctor 100% online, and if prescribed, your treatment ships discreetly right to your door. Remember, if prescribed, your treatment ships discreetly to your door. So your neighbors don't have to know about your business. Your neighbors don't have to know about what you're doing to get that confidence. So ready to level up your confidence in the in the bedroom? Head to RUGIET.com and use promo code LOCKEDONMLB for 15% off your first order. That's Rugiet.com, RUGIET.com, promo code LOCKEDONMLB. Make sure to use our code so they know we sent you. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox, or where they get their podcasts. The show's available on all major podcast platforms. Also, feel free to follow us on TikTok. We're on TikTok. We're on X, formerly Twitter, at Locked On Sox. And I found it funny that some people took a real exception on TikTok to the clip I posted about how I just don't like pitch framing. I don't think it's a skill. It's a manipulation of the rules. And one guy's like, oh, you don't deserve a broadcast. And I was like, well, you're manipulating rules. And you try to say, well, tell me how you're manipulating rules because you're just manipulating the eyes of the ump. Well, yeah, you're manipulating the guy who's calling defined rules in the playbook of what balls and strikes are. And all I was saying was I could see the people that have been calling for the automated strike system, balls and strike system to be for the entire time, not just the challenge system. That's all. And that's the thing about this discourse. You get these trolls out there that are like, you know what? I'm going to totally be like, you don't deserve this. Why don't you just say I disagree? And why? That's fine. That's okay. It's okay to disagree. Or, hey, I think pitch framing has its value, X, Y, and Z. That's okay too. You know, we would be a much better world if we just didn't be like, ugh, I'm going to go to infinity hate, you know, that type of stuff. Well, John Greenberg of The Athletic shared the infamous company of bad the White Sox joined by losing 100 games. He shared it on X, formerly Twitter, and I've got it up for those watching on YouTube at John_Greenberg. Here's the full list, and he's got the asterisks for expansion. The Rockies, they're in the currently. The Orioles, 2018, 2019, 2021, because there was a shortened season in 2020. 19, 10, 11, and 12. A's, 19, 19, 2021, and that's in the 1900s. The Mets, 1962 through 65. The Phillies, 1938 through 42. The Braves, 1922 through 1924. And 1909 and 1912 through 1912. Red Sox, 1925 through 1927. Blue Jays, 1977 through 1979. Royals, 2004 through 06. Houston, 2011 through 2013. Rangers/Senators, 1961 through 64. And why did I read that out? Well, I read it out for the people listening on Apple or Spotify. But as you see, for those watching on YouTube, 3 expansion teams on the list. And then a couple of teams that had multiple 3 straight losing seasons that are currently going, that eventually turn things around. And it's good to know that the White Sox have a fellow peer in bad in the Rockies, although it would have been nice for Colorado to only win 40 games this year. Thanks, Colorado, for going out and winning like 42 games and making sure that you only finish with maybe 119 losses. But there are a couple clubs that made losing worth their while. That made that type of losing worth their while. And that is why you got to hope this losing pays off with acquiring the elite talent needed to turn things around like the Astros and the Orioles did. And I talked about it at length last year. Also, the Mets went out and acquired young talent that eventually got them to the 1969 World Series. I got way too ingrained with Mets history last year that I shouldn't have had to. But the Astros returned to the playoffs in 2015, 2 seasons after going 51 and 111. And that finished off the 3 straight 100-loss seasons that they had. And then in 2017, they win 101 games and the World Series. And they also turned things around to where they had 3 straight 100-win seasons, and then they won another World Series. Now, the Orioles' first run of terribleness last century happened when they were actually in St. Louis. They were the St. Louis Browns, and they had a winning record 4 seasons later. But the organization's most recent run of futility was on purpose when they went 52 and 110 in 2021 to cap off that 3-stretch run of futility. But they turned things around the next year to go 83 and 79, and they won 101 games in 2023. However, they did not win a playoff game in 2023 and 2024. And they've basically crumbled like the White Sox have, underperformance and all that type of stuff. Now, the Jays, I want to go over them because they had 3 more losing seasons after their 3-year run of 100 losses, partially because they were an expansion team. But in 1983, they go 89 and 73. And then they win 99 games in 1985 and lose 4-3 in the ALCS. And they also go on a 10-year run starting in 1983 of winning. They always had a record over 500. And they finished it off with 2 World Series, beating the White Sox on the way to that final World Series. So you want to see this rebuild basically pan out to have sustained success, kind of like what happened to the Astros. Kind of go on the run like Toronto did. But like I said in the first segment, we're going to have to trust Chris Getz to make the right decisions because, again, he's going to have a great support. Yeah, I think he's got a good supporting cast around him, but he's still going to be the one that has the final say on these things. So we got to trust him, like it or not, to lead the White Sox toward that sustained success. And it's just going to be hard having that faith. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night until a World Series champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or listen to your podcast. And I'll be back tomorrow with Brett Valentini of SouthsideSox.com. Kind of get his perspective as, you know, he kind of has been tracking the awfulness of the White Sox the last couple of years. I kind of want to get him on to talk about, hey, White Sox now just had 3 straight 100 loss seasons. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion on the episode page on YouTube via email, lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com, or leave them on X, formerly Twitter, @LockedOnSox or @ToddJDub. Also, make sure to like today's episode on YouTube or leave a 5-star review at wherever you get your podcast. Have a great day, and I will talk to you tomorrow.